Hey everyone, and welcome to the Shared Cup podcast. This is episode 40, and today my guest, Kristen Humiston, shares her story of coming from a dark place of spiritual woundedness to a place of renewed hope as God began to reveal himself to her. Kristen shares how God filled her with joy and what you can do to experience the same in your life today. I'm Allison Liddick, and this podcast is for women who want to experience the overflowing love of Jesus Christ through our own stories. We pray that you are blessed by this message. Hello, and welcome to the Shared Cup podcast. I am your host, Allison Liddick, and my guest today is Kristen Humiston. Kristen, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, I'm so glad that you are here. I appreciate you taking time to do this and be on the Shared Cup. Your story is, I know, going to be very impactful to a lot of people. So thank you for stepping out and sharing today.
Absolutely. My joy and honor, even though, some parts of our stories are difficult to tell, right?
Yeah.
But God allows them for a reason. So giving him the glory to use them in whatever way he sees fit.
That's very good. And a good point, too. There's actually, I'm sure all of us have parts of our story that we don't like to revisit. And it can be painful to do so or uncomfortable. So thank you for stepping through that and doing it anyway. I want to make sure people get to know you a little bit before we jump straight into your story. So Kristen, why don't you share a little bit about you, who you are, what you do, where you live, or anything else you want to share?
Yeah, I am in central Wisconsin right now. Grew up as a pastor's kid and then married a pastor. And right now we're in between ministries. We have 6 children, we're in like what we call birthday season because pretty much all of our children have birthdays from November through the middle of January. So my youngest is 5 and my oldest is 17, or about to be 17, I should say.
Wow. So you are really feeling it by the end of January on your bank account.
Absolutely. Yes, very much so. We've got 3 that are doing homeschool this year and then 3 that are in a private school. And so we kind of are feeling 2020. I'm feeling more of the angst of 2020 school started than I have felt in all of these months leading up to it, because sometimes we have kids on quarantine and sometimes they're back. And this back and forth has been quite a lot. And we just kind of said Christmas is going to be very, very simple. We'll celebrate your birthdays big time. And then let's just focus on Jesus during Christmas. So that's helpful.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And yes, man, we've had to learn how to be very flexible this year with stuff going back and forth. And parents have taken on way more than they've ever planned on or had to before. So kudos to you, Mama, getting it done and during birthday season.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I want to make sure you have plenty of time to share your story too. So why don't I just kind of pass over the floor to you and let you share, Kristen?
Sure. So like I said, I actually grew up central Wisconsin as well, and loved the country that we lived in. We lived in a small town, but it still had enough. We didn't live in town. We lived out on the outskirts of town. And it was a place where I kind of liken it to, if you've seen it's an older movie now, but My Girl. You could ride your bike around freely, and neighborhood children were in and out, and everybody just spent their summer days going down to the river that was nearby, either canoeing or swimming or whatever, and then coming home by the time it was dinner and that kind of thing. And so I really enjoyed that freedom, and I love to write. I love to think of crazy stories, and I had notebooks full of stories after story after story. And then when I was 13, my dad ended up changing and going into church planting. And we moved about an hour away from where I grew up. A year or 2 before that, we had one of those earth-shattering events in the community, and a young girl that was just a year younger than myself was abducted and killed about a mile from my home. And so I remember that pivotally as the first time I really encountered fear. And the reality that life hurts and life can be really dangerous and unpredictable.
Right.
And for the first time, where I used to just freely ride my bike. My dad worked at the church, was a mile away from our house. I could just freely ride there any day I wanted to. We stopped any of that. And it was, you can't ride your bike unless somebody's with you. I don't want you guys going in this particular area anymore. And really inside of me, I thought, well, I don't want to anyway.
Right.
So I just feel like when I look back at it, I feel like that was a moment of a bit of that innocence and naivety when that was broken for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then just a year and a half later, being the point where everything that I had known growing up as a child was taken away. And I was plopped in a new city. It was much bigger. We lived in town with neighbors that were right next to us. And it felt like all of that freedom and space was gone. And you kind of don't know how to process that as a 13-year-old. And so you just
it's a lot.
set it aside and move on, right? So I'm actually back in my childhood home right now. But that's a little bit later in the story how we ended up back there. I went to college. When I was in high school, I did lots of short-term missions trips, and I really thought I was going to end up on a mission field somewhere. Spanish speaking was, my desire and what I enjoyed doing. And so in college, I met and married a youth pastor who didn't speak a lick of Spanish. And he really didn't have any interest to go to any Spanish speaking place. So we kind of imagined life as, oh, I can take the youth on small term missions trips. And, this was how we were going to work life together, right? That never happened. And that's okay. But I think that a lot of life, we have these expectations and they don't work out, right? And that's another reality that kind of either slowly hits you or hits you quickly, depending on your circumstances. And that was something that I have had to work to come to terms with. After we met and married, I was a senior in college when we got married. And at the end of that, we took our first full-time pastorate job in northern Wisconsin. And right before, about a year and a half later, before our first child was born, I worked at a bank and there was a bank robbery and I was held at gunpoint. Now, what is interesting about that is that I don't remember having the gun held to me. I remember him setting it down. I remember handing him the money. And I do remember thinking, oh my goodness, if you point that gun at me and at this child, because I was 9 months pregnant, I'm going to climb over the counter and kill you. Like, I remember this very mama bear response going on. And then he left and he was caught. There was police training going on in the area. The bank that I worked at was quite a ways off the beaten path. And normally it would have taken about 15 minutes for police personnel to get out to us, but there happened to be a training for reserves going on in the area. And so there were over 100 reserve officers that were in the woods and scouring about where this man went. And he was caught. He was obviously a repeat offender from the jail. And police said that he was ready to just take them on if needed.
Wow.
They found several armored vests and all sorts of ammunition and guns and things in his vehicle. So I really know that God had his protection on us.
Right.
That said, because I had my child not even 2 weeks later, I never took the counseling that they offered. And 9 months after that, our home was broken into, and I didn't ever get care for that either. I had come in and our home in a couple different places was kind of ransacked. My husband was at youth group, finishing up youth group, and I was left there alone to try to figure out what to do. So life has a way of moving on, right? And you add these things on and you just think, it's fine. It'll go away. It's not bothering me. I got to do what I got to do, right?
Right.
As it was, we went on and about 15 more years of ministry happened before I was just at the point where I was pretty broken. I was angry and bitter for chronic things that happened in ministry. And so it was lots of small t traumas, is what I know they are now. I didn't know that at the time. And I had sought out help, but the help that I had sought out was always various churches' counseling departments because we didn't have insurance that would be able to pay for it. It was going to have to come fully out of our pockets. And where I called for help was always, oh, you don't attend our church? Well, then you'll need to pay usually it was about $150 per visit, out of pocket.
Yeah.
And so it was cost prohibitive for me to seek, and to get the care that I know and I knew that I needed at that time. So you do what you got to do again, and you move on in life. In 2017, we were at a church. My husband was set up to be the senior pastor and take over for a retiring pastor. And 3 weeks before that happened, they called my husband in and very much out of the blue and without biblical cause dismissed him and said, it was on a Saturday, said, you can come in and pack your things today. If you can't get in here today, then you'll need to make an appointment because we're fixing the locks and you'll have to, you won't be able to get in after today. So that was like the final straw for me personally. And the next 6 weeks were again just that mode of like, we got to do what we got to do because we have to get out of here. We don't have a job. And we ended up, my brother got my husband a job at his factory, moving over 350 miles back here to Wisconsin. We've been here since. And my husband was ready, Rearing, to go back into ministry and like, where can I send my resume to next?
Right.
But I was ready to breathe and get some time to heal. So what's been a gift here is that we don't have the problem of the finances because the insurance through his company provides counseling. And so through that process of counseling and time and the healing that I have learned and walked through, I finally can look at these places and identify some important parts of my story. And that's what I wanted to be able to share with you guys today, is where God has worked in my heart during all of these things. One of the issues that I was bitter about is that I felt like I had given God a lot of my life, and he didn't really live up to his side of the bargain. I felt like I'd given up dreams that I had to follow him and do what I thought he wanted me to do. I felt like I had served him by, leading the music ministry and spending time in the nursery for so long and leading and developing Bible studies. And I'd done all these things. And where was his provision? Where was his kindness? Where was his goodness? I couldn't see it. Part of that was because I legitimately had traumas that weren't attended to. And I now will never live again without a counselor or a coach. Counselors help us by digging into the past and helping to overcome some of those traumas through various therapies. I have had EMDR. I've walked through that therapy, as well as cognitive behavioral type therapy. And then coaching helps us where we're at and move forward, right? So through these last 3 years, I've walked through both of those sets. Now I'm at a point where I feel like I will just never be without a coach, and unless something comes up. But the value of investing in myself, whether that's time, whether that's financial, that's important. The saying, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, right? It's there for a reason. And yet we laugh about it, but it's really important. And our health as women, wives, is really important. And I really believed that life would fall apart without me. When we were terminated, all of that was stripped away. I couldn't lead a Bible study. I wasn't on a worship team. I wasn't doing anything that felt like I was doing something for God. And one question that my counselor asked me is, she said, well, why does that bother you? And I realized that I had this fear in me. I would have never thought prior to walking this road that I was performance driven. I didn't think that I was a perfectionist. I didn't think a lot of things about myself that I found out. But I realized that I just was afraid I was afraid of a lot of things. And I listed out to her fear after fear after fear. And she said, fear is the belief that God isn't in the next thing.
Yeah.
And that was really profound for me because my head knew, of course, the Lord is there for you. I came to know the Lord as a young child and I never doubted my faith, but I did doubt his goodness for me personally. Yes, he's a good God, but maybe I'm just not doing something that, makes the mark.
Right.
I remember seeing a decorative plate in my grandma's house growing up, and it's had the verse, I think it's 1 John 4:19. It says, perfect love casts out all fear. And I remember reading that as a young child and thinking, what does that even mean? And it was one of those verses that would come back to me throughout my life. And every time I wondered, what does that really mean? Like, it sounds pretty, it's on a pretty plate, but is that even true? Like, and what is perfect love?
Right.
I couldn't really grasp it. And the process of healing brought me to the point of his perfect love. Like, God, I have nothing to give you. And he was like, yeah, that's the point. I love just you,
Yeah.
just for you. That was a big turning point for me. And it was as if everything that I knew in my head shifted down into my heart. And I didn't have to strive anymore. My middle name is Joy, and I used to think God cursed me with that. And I would think, Lord, why did you allow my parents to name me Kristen Joy? Like, that's terrible. You're always throwing it in my face that I'm not the thing that I should be. This is, and when I grasped the power of his perfect love that comes no matter what I've done or not done, that joy just absolutely infused me. And I would call my husband would text me at work. Sometimes he'd call me and I'd say, well, I'm 4 hours into the day and I still have joy. I don't know.
So
It might
good.
go away, but it's here. And for about 2 months from this pivotal moment of just really receiving his love, nothing that I've done, but totally fully from him alone, I would wake up and I'd go, is it still going to be here? Like,
Yeah.
am I going to turn back into this angry green monster thing? But no, his joy has remained. And yes, I have ups and downs, right? Of we all have things that get into us and attitudes that aren't right at times, but his joy has remained. And I know that it is because he has completely revealed himself, loving me perfectly, even on my bad days, even though I'm not serving in church, and I didn't even know I was holding on to that, right? The pastor's wife title, the pastor's kid title. I remember
Right.
as a small child I was one of those pastor's kids, right? They rule the church like they think it's their personal kingdom. That becomes your identity. And some of that is self-inflicted, but some of that is put on you by everybody around
Right.
you. Oh, you just can do that because you're the pastor's kid. Oh, you just expect this because you're the pastor's kid. Oh, you're the pastor's kid. Like, it's not always
Right.
negative. Sometimes
Right.
it's positive, but either way, that quickly becomes our identity. And then it was pastor's wife.
Yeah.
And pastor's wife is my identity. And so learning that nothing I have and no role, no label that I put on myself earns his love. No label I put on myself, makes it to the point where I don't have his love, right? It's really powerful. And I think that fear of not being good enough, or the fears that came from my traumas, I could not, for all of the years of my marriage, I could not stand being home alone at night. And this would only be an issue about 2 or 3 times a year if there was a conference or a retreat or something that my husband needed to be out of town for. But otherwise, he was usually home, by 10 or 11, latest at night. And there was only so much darkness between, 8
Right.
and 10 or whatever. But I was very hyper vigilant, which is common in trauma victims. And so physical fear held me captive. And I feel like spiritual fear of not understanding my identity in Christ held me captive.
Yeah.
And my message to so many is that we need to step out and get the help we need, right? That's the mind and the spiritual connection are so integrated And the church doesn't talk a lot about it. The church's answer is many times pray more, read your Bible. Those are good things. But when the brain is broken, it needs special care, right? And so that's what I do now, is to help bring awareness to that and to individuals. I am a life coach now. And so I don't take them through. If I meet somebody that I know needs care specific to trauma, etc., I refer them out to where they need to be. But that is part of, I work primarily with ministry wives, and a lot of ministry wives have a buildup of small t traumas, which lead to burnout often, marital issues often, and personal just kind of shut down, right? And we often hear them say like, oh, I just feel like I need to put a smile on my face when I go to church on Sunday morning, or some of them, I'm done going to church. I'm not going to do that any longer, because there's so much intense pain going on, but they don't have an outlet to be able to properly attend to themselves. So that's my heart, is that people would be able to learn to attend to themselves, especially in that area of the mind and body connection.
So the main thing that kept you from getting that care, because it sounded like you knew you needed it at a later point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was the financial impact, because you were self-employed and didn't have the good insurance to pay for. That was the main hindering factor, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's pretty common, depending on what kind of a church system you are in. We are in a non-denominational church. And so a lot of them, if it's an independent church, even some that are part of maybe what's called a fellowship, not a denomination, they are all basically independent churches. There is no financial help that comes to each individual church. So, matter of fact, one church that we talked to, they said, we were at for a few years, said, well, we would give you a raise, but then your children would have to go on regular insurance, and we don't want to have to pay for that. So there is a tension that exists. Like, we want to serve the Lord, but we do need to pay our bills, right?
Yeah, that's helpful.
Mm-hmm. and that fact, that was something that I learned early on in healing. There's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're familiar with that. The bottom two are basic, like your life basic needs that you need to have met. And if they're not, you can't function in some of these higher things that are like your creative space and relationship space and that kind of thing. And so for us, a chronic inability to meet legitimate financial needs was also playing into some of my trauma issues, trust issues, healing, which, that has been one thing that has been very helpful where we're at now. We can make ends meet. And watching that in motion is really fascinating to me.
That's good. And you have an appreciation that some people will not ever have because of where you were before, which I know a lot of people that are self-employed have that appreciation, right?
Yes.
Well, praise God for where you're at now and everything that He has taken you through and grown you through. What would be something, or do you have any ideas for someone that is looking to get counseling, that knows they need it, that doesn't have the finances? Are there any resources out there?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of online sources now. I personally have a listing. I've not put it on my website yet. I would like to, of a few online places, which I'm just going to ask you to put in your show notes, because I'm going to remember it after this call. But that do like sliding scales.
Okay.
And I checked into one recently because I didn't need it, but I just wanted to see, what is the sliding scale going to tell me about. Basically, they take really basic information. So family size and income. And based upon that, it was going to be like $35 for each session for me. And I find that very reasonable. There does need to be an investment on the part of the person who is involved, because that helps them understand. And that actually is part of the healing process, is putting that investment in. And so that's not a bad thing. I know that $35 for some people is even still way out of their range, right? And so there is extra help that comes in. And I don't know if the scale goes lower, because I didn't do a bunch of different experiments, right? But this was a faith-based one that I put it into. And that's just one. I've since found out about several others. And so I can get those as well to you if you want to put them in the show notes. But there are places, and I know of a nonprofit coaching. If you're not at a place where you need therapy, but you need your coaching underwritten, there are some nonprofit coaching organizations as well. So I personally, in working with ministry wives, keep my coaching costs lower, and then I have kind of a different scale for if it's ministry or not. And I just do that because I have a heart for women that are in ministry or ministry wives. But I believe that every ministry person, whether that's the wife or the husband, we've even had several of our children now go through counseling. They need that support at times. And it's good to develop a relationship with a counselor as someone in ministry, regardless of if you're having problems or not, because at some point you will.
Mm-hmm.
Having that pre-established relationship makes that a little bit more attainable. It doesn't seem like such a mountain of pride to climb to get the help that you need.
Okay, that's good. I know. I feel like everyone could use counseling, like every human. Everybody needs counseling at some point. Definitely a coach. And I'm glad that you went into the fact that you use both of those and what the difference is for some people, because I don't think a lot of people understand, like, what's the difference with that. A lot of people need a counselor and a coach at the same time. Yep. Like, probably the majority of us. So I'm glad that you got that and are taking care of you, which is so important. And as moms and wives, I do feel like we kind of put ourselves to the back a lot, even though we know we need care. But sometimes it comes down to a financial burden, right? Or a wall that's in between us and what we need. So mamas, wives, get the help that you need. Take care of you. It's so, so, so important. Even just, a little bit of self-care once a week or something like that.
Well, it's amazing because we really have the time. I mean, we make a lot of excuses. I think humans are very adept at making excuses and tricking themselves. Some of that is flesh. Sometimes it is actually maybe a spiritual battle that is happening.
Yeah, that's true.
But some of it's just pride, right? And so we'll make up every excuse in the book not to do the one thing that could most positively affect everything else.
Right. Good point.
And so maybe it's starting off once a month, maybe it's just, well, I'll try this one time. I was talking with someone that was describing how much they felt like a failure and they were just defeated here or here or here, or I should say, and here. And they felt like they needed to choose between doing basic household tasks and this, or is it going to be this? They're also a business owner. And they were trying to choose, like, nothing can be let go. I'm needed in all the spaces. And if I don't do it, nobody else will. And even though I was asking questions that I was hoping would help them release some of that expectation on themselves, they never got to the point where they were really willing to do something different. And so if you're feeling really stuck and, there are legitimate needs that we have that hold us captive, there are legitimate roles and tasks we need to get done. But if we're not in good health, we're not going to be able to do any of those well.
Right.
There was something interesting. It's sitting on my desk and I wasn't going to talk about it, but I will if you don't mind.
No, go right ahead.
So you call this podcast is The Shared Cup, right?
Yep.
We went through a Dave Ramsey financial program there, Financial Peace University, with a group of pastors. We were invited from somebody within Dave Ramsey to be a part of this shortly after we were terminated. And it was just pastors, which was so fabulous because, little plug here, if anybody's listening and they have this going on, pastors, we had two different opportunities to go through the program when our churches hosted it, but we're not safe in our churches to talk about real issues. And so this was the first time that we had a safe place to come and talk about real financial issues and concerns that we had. And at the end of the program, he brought out a gift that was going to be for us, and it was a silver plated like a wine cup. There's an actual word for that, but I forget what it is. And he said, this is what we are hoping for you, is that from this new place of filling up, that you will just begin to overflow. And it was such a picture of what was happening within my own heart at the time, and has been part of the theme of what I want other women to understand too. Is you have to make sure there's something in that cup, and hopefully that it's being renewed and full. Jesus said, I came so that you might have abundant life.
Right.
So that picture of absolutely overflowing, right? And so I have it sitting over on a shelf that you can't see right now, but as my daily reminder to make sure I'm pouring into me what needs to be poured into me in order that I may pour out to all of those around me. And there was something from a trip when I was in college. I went and spent time in Argentina, and I found a small box just the other day that I had not looked into. We've moved almost 17 times. It's either 17 or 16 in our 18 years of marriage, not always to different towns. But I didn't know this still existed in all of my stuff. And it is this little cup, which
Oh,
looks awful lot
yeah.
like the silver one I have over there. And I was just amazed. I feel like God gave me this gift 20 years ago that He knew I would unwrap during this season
Mm-hmm.
as another like personal, see how much I care for you.
Yeah. That's great.
He is such a good God. Yeah. So it
What a
overwhelms.
great thing to find
Yeah.
from that long ago.
Yeah.
And what a good reminder to keep that by you and the other cup that you were talking about, just to remind yourself to get filled up.
Mhm.
Because that is something, when we stop and look, like, have we taken time to get filled afresh today by the Holy Spirit? So that's a good reminder to have right there as well. Good advice for anyone. We should probably all keep like an empty cup or something by us,
right?
just to
Something
remind
visual. Yeah. We all have different things and that fill us. I mean,
Yes.
the word
Yep.
should be the number one thing that
Right.
fills us.
Yep.
But because we are made as integrated people, we need movement, we need proper nutrition. I enjoy writing music on the piano, just taking my Bible and
Nice.
plopping it down, opening to Psalms or sometimes other passages, and I'll just write songs and just sing to Him. And so that's something that fills me like none other. And there's other things for other people. Some people love being out in nature, and that's what fills them. So I kind of call those my non-negotiables, and I also have them written sitting right next to my next to my workspace as well.
Yeah.
To remind me, like, hey, if these things aren't attended to on a regular basis, some seasons you have to let some things go. But if they're not attended to for a very long time, then that will start to impact,
Yeah. That's
mind,
good.
body, and soul. So
Right. That's good to even have those identified, number one, and then having them sitting there next to you. Because we cannot pour when we have nothing in our cups. We can't.
Yep.
If we want to be frustrated and have no joy in our lives,
right.
that's a great way to get there.
Yeah.
Is to not take time to get filled back up. So that's good to do that. I love that you did that. I would recommend that to all of our listeners. First, take time to see what fills you up, and then keep them close by so you're doing them. One thing I want to talk to you about is the titles, right? So I know it was identity in the pastor's kid, pastor's wife. That's a lot of pressure. I've never personally had those titles, but I've heard from a lot of people that have, right? It's a lot of pressure. It's the identity, right? What's some advice that you have for people that are a pastor's kid or grew up a pastor's kid or maybe pastor's wife now? What's some advice that you have for them to kind of push that to the side and really live in their identity in Christ? What would you say to them?
I feel like there's not a super simple answer.
Right, sure.
I go through this in a course that I've created with some of my coaching clients, and I run the course also kind of a la carte at different times. But one of the steps is go back and review your story. And that's something we can all do regardless of finances.
Right.
And so we walk through that process together in coaching, going through your story. But a simple way is to write down, you could do it in 10 minutes even, take Post-it notes and write down important people, important events, important places. And don't worry about just write it down, slap it somewhere around you. And later you can go back and kind of organize them. and invite the Lord in to say, Lord, where are you showing me like a theme? What would you have me see from these important places, people, and events? For me, I did this very specifically, life story, and then very specifically to church events because church so encapsulated my life. I actually went church by church by church that we had been at. We had been at 3 when I was married and then the 2 when I was growing up. And I wrote down the church and like maybe if there was a significant event that had happened at it. But then I also, in a different color and shape for me, which was something I normally don't do, it's kind of random, but I went and I answered the question, how did I feel during that time? For me, I was a person who just ignored emotions. And I needed to learn to bring those emotions out, that emotions are healthy and good. And a lot of times, again, that's something that as pastors' wives in the Christian circles kind of taught that emotions shouldn't have a seat at the table, but they should. We just need to learn like how to arrange them at the table, right? Their place. So going through your story, evaluating your physical health. Part of my answer and solution was actually I went and saw an integrative doctor just in these last 3 years and have been working with her to get my progesterone was off. So if your hormones are off, you're going to be off.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that's a really simple switch, but you need to be working with a doctor who's going to really, I did a very large panel and got a really broad picture of what was going on. So your story, your health, I think sometimes figuring out your worship style is also important. And I say that because we were in churches that I would say didn't match how I really wanted to worship. Like I felt like I always had to suppress worshiping the Lord, which is it's sad, but it's kind of painful on a Sunday morning if you feel like you just have to be here and look like everybody else when you just want to worship the Lord, right? So really learning about that, I think, is important. And your environment, your space. So even though, we had financial issues, there's still clutter everywhere, paper clutter, whatever. We have clutter of our heart, but then we have physical clutter. And it was amazing to see how much taking away that clutter, that was part of my process too, was just completely freeing. I'm not a minimalist, but I am very aware of what I put in my space now. And I allow myself to put pretty things in my space. For example, this sign, I would have never purchased 5 years ago. Now, it sounds ridiculous because it was from Hobby Lobby and I got it 40% off, right? Not a big deal. But when you're living on a budget that's so small and you are pinching every penny, I'm not going to put a sign on the list of things that needs to be purchased.
Right. Yep.
But I never did. So I was always living in a space that I didn't like. What we see and what we have put around us is so important to our health, and we oftentimes don't realize that.
Wow. So I know that was a loaded question. That was a big one. So how would someone get in touch with you about your coaching if they wanted to learn more information or be a part of one of your programs?
Sure. My website is theministrywifecoach.com. And I also have Facebook and IG at that name. I also have an online gathering place that is run on the Mighty Network platform that especially ministry wives and ministry leaders, but anybody who is ministry minded and servant hearted, a lot of times women's ministry directors or children's directors, those are often overlooked too and share struggles that are very similar.
Yeah, sure.
And so that is the gathering place, again, on the Mighty Network. So
I love that. That's good. So just search you there and they'll find that to join.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So thank you again for diving in and sharing your story, and all glory to God for where you're at right now and that you're stepping out. You've got your life coaching and you're doing your thing now. I mean, this is awesome. I love that you have the heart for wives of pastors and are just really digging into that and being that servant to them. So thank you for that. And congratulations on your business and your coaching and everything that you're doing right now. So is there anything else that you would like to share with any woman or anyone listening today to this podcast episode?
I want to leave one verse. It's from 1 Peter 4. It's verse 19. And I just want to reiterate God's love, like his true, unconditional, absolute delight in us as people. in every single one of us. And his heart is good. His heart for us is so good. And often we doubt that. I wanted to leave this verse. Again, it's 1 Peter 4:19. Therefore, let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls to a faithful creator while doing good.
Mm.
We can entrust our souls to him. And when we do, I feel like he comes and he fills up that space when we are in that absolute surrender.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much. That's a great way to end this episode. And thank you again, Kristen, for coming on and sharing.
Well, thanks for having me. It was an honor.
Yes, thank you. And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in today. Please like, share, and subscribe to the Shared Cup podcast. Don't forget to leave a comment for Kristen and let her know how much you appreciate her coming on and sharing, and reach out to her if you're interested in her coaching or to learn more on that. But Kristen, thank you again so much for being on.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today for the Shared Cup podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and remember that each one of us has a story that shows the overflowing love of God. Have a blessed day and thank you so much for joining us.